Let's talk about the third point, and that is what's wrong with the Congress party, the grand old party. Actually, to understand what's wrong with the Congress party, you need to understand the genesis of the Congress party, and that's going to take too long in this particular video. So I encourage you to read books about it, and especially partition-related books, positions taken by the Congress in the roundtable conferences, Ambedkar's writings on that topic as well, which give you a good understanding of what the Congress party actually stood for. And when you actually look at it that way, you realize that the Congress party was actually just a gathering. It was just a platform. It was just a platform for people back in the day to come and make their voice heard against the British. They never really had an agenda, and people with an agenda, a lot of them actually moved out and made their own parties. For example, Mr. Jinnah is a prominent Congress leader, and he moved out and made his own party. And there were many others in the Muslim League that were actually Congress voters, Congress leaders. Similarly, the so-called Hindu leaders or the Hindu Mahasabha, there were a lot of people who were actually associated with the Congress who later moved and turned, as supporters of the Hindu Mahasabha. And then, of course, you follow that story all the way to the modern era, and you've got the Sharad Pawar faction, you've got the Trinamool Congress, you've got the YSR Congress. All of these are Congress factions. So that's because there was really no ideology. And at a certain frequency, that schism, that lack of ideology, actually creates a new party that goes on its own trajectory or direction. And of course, they swear allegiance to the Congress ideology when it comes to elections. But if their ideologies are the same, then why did they actually make another party? So why is Mamata Banerjee not in the Congress? So why is YSR Reddy, whose father was the chief minister as part of the Congress, is not in the Congress? So it's either that the ideologies are different, or that they're just greedy, right? I think it might be a matter of both in some cases. But the Congress, the leadership, they were all educated outside India. They only had one point of view. Even Mr. Gandhi was educated in, he had foreign education. Obviously Nehru and his lineage that follows today, they've all been educated outside the country. And there's nothing wrong in being educated outside the country, but you need to understand that that's one point of view of looking at the world, about India, about a nation, etc. And there are many other points of view. Within Western philosophy, there are lots of healthy debates that have happened in terms of what defines a nation state, etc. Today, of course, they are in a total leadership crisis. I mean, they had, at least at some time, some charismatic leaders like Nehru and Indira Gandhi, and to some extent Rajiv Gandhi as well. I even say that Sonia Gandhi was a more charismatic leader than who they have today. And they have the leadership vacuum, and obviously they have the president in Rahul Gandhi, who is apparently trying to resign today. And on the other side, they have no clear reason for people to vote for them. So again, why should we vote for Congress? Because democracy is in danger under the BJP. Well, BJP was they said that in 14. BJP was in power in 14, and they've been in power for 5 years. Democracy looks to be all right to me, and no clear steps have been taken in the direction to actually undermine it. No legal steps have been taken. You can always say that Modi is a fascist, he's a dictator, he takes all decisions on his own. That doesn't mean anything unless there is evidence that he's actually circumvented the law, or he's changed, or he's changing the parliamentary system and to turn it into some sort of dictatorship like they've done in Turkey recently. Erdogan has appointed himself as the kind of the president for life. Xi Jinping has done that in China. He's removed the 2-term limit that the Chinese Communist Party had for its leaders as the president of China. None of that has happened in India. He's a popular leader. He's been elected by the people, and people had every right to reject him, but they chose not to. In fact, in his case, the people have clearly elected him. So technically, that's not a good thing, because you're actually voting for your party, but this guy is so popular that no one really cares about the party. So if there was no Modi, would the BJP win? Maybe, maybe not, and certainly not by this sort of a margin. More importantly, think of this as a litmus test. Would the people feel betrayed if the parliamentary committee of the BJP did not elect Modi as their leader and therefore the next Prime Minister who will swear in the next week or so. They could do that. They could make Mr. Gadkari the Prime Minister. They could make Rajnath Singh the Prime Minister. They could make any of its leaders the Prime Minister. That is the prerogative of the party. Would the people feel betrayed? They would, because in their mind they have already chosen who they are voting for. But the same can't be said about the Congress. The Rahul Gandhi was obviously not a match in terms of popularity for Modi, but he did not inspire people. He does not have, unless you're talking about certain groups of people who feel threatened. And of course, Rahul Gandhi's main job is to make sure that they feel threatened. So, the minorities and the the backward castes, and I hate using that word really. Congress's whole policy has been based on stratification. So, they keep fueling those fears so that they don't unite and, vote for a different bloc en masse, which is what they've done. They keep talking about polarization. I'll come to that in a second. But, they're really the experts at that if you pay a little more attention to how they've won their own elections back in the day. Like I said, opposition is required, but I'm not sure if the Congress would actually necessarily be a healthy opposition, because their track record is not of being a healthy opposition. I'm not saying the BJP were particularly great at being in opposition, but right now it's 2019, the BJP is in power, so we are talking about the Congress. The other thing I wanted to, this is very close to my heart, is this whole idea of Rahul Gandhi in his press conference mentioned that we stand for the idea of India and our fight with the BJP is ideological. And I don't buy this. I don't buy this firstly because I understand this in great detail, and that's not true. But let's look at some of the evidence. 7 former chief ministers from the Congress party. 7 former chief ministers. And then Rahul Gandhi and Mehbooba Mufti and Deve Gowda, who was, for God's sake, the Prime Minister of the country, lost their seats in this election. So I have a list here in front of me. Bhupinder Hooda, Haryana, Digvijay Singh, Madhya Pradesh, Sushil Kumar Shinde, Maharashtra, Meghalaya Chief Minister Mukul Sangma, Karnataka Chief Minister, these are former Chief Minister Veerappa Moily, Arunachal former Chief Minister Nabam Tukhi, former Chief Minister Ashok Chavan from Maharashtra, and like I said, Deve Gowda, Mehbooba Mufti, and Rahul Gandhi himself. They lost their own seats. So one of two things has happened. One is that their ideology, which they represent as distinct from the BJP, has been rejected, because that's all you can say in a democratic system, because they've gone to the people with an ideology and people have rejected Rahul Gandhi in Amethi. So one conclusion could be that their ideology has been rejected. The other conclusion could be that there's actually no difference in the ideology, and that's my point of view. There is no real difference in the ideology. There's no right wing, left wing in India. There's just left wing, and it's a competition between who's left, of the left. So you've got the leftist of the Communist Party, and then you've got the left of the Congress, and then you've got the center left, the BJP. There's no right wing in India, and I'll come to that in a second. I have my iPad here somewhere, and I can't find it now. But I had an article on this as well, but looking at some of the people who have switched parties. And let's say your ideology is distinct. How do you explain top leaders from the Congress joining the BJP overnight? What happened to your ideology? Just in this election, Swati Chaturvedi, spokesperson of the Congress. Tom Vadakkan, spokesperson of the Congress and very close aide of Sonia Gandhi, amongst many others, left the Congress and joined the BJP overnight. What happened to your ideology? For 50 years, or in their case, 10 years or 15 years, you've been criticizing whatever Modi does, and overnight you join the BJP. Maybe on the promise of better portfolios in the ministries or something like that, or maybe because really it doesn't matter to you whether you're in the BJP or the Congress. You like Modi and you joined him. That happened with Hemanta Biswas in Assam. He clearly said that I'm just inspired by Modi, I'm joining him. And Ritu Bahuguna Joshi was the Pradesh Committee chief of Uttar Pradesh for the Congress Party, and she joined the BJP last time. Same thing happened in Odisha. The leader of the opposition, so the BJD, Biju Janata Dal is in power in the assembly there, and the leader of the opposition was a Congress Party man. He joined the BJP. But can you understand the gravity of that? That's like Mallikarjun Kharge leaving the or Manmohan Singh leaving the Congress and joining the BJP. What ideology? You switch like like goats and sheep overnight, and you call it an ideological difference. There is no ideological difference. The ideological difference is very minor, and it is easily trumped by personal interests. That's the reality. That's the harsh reality. Just one point there on the Rahul Gandhi story in Amethi. It's very significant. He lost full marks to Smriti Irani because she tried the last time, she couldn't quite make it. This time she's made it. It's remarkable for Gandhis to lose the Amethi. It's a sign of things really. And in my mind, if Rahul Gandhi has any sort of moral, if he's got any sort of moral judgment, he he has to step out of electoral politics. Of active electoral politics till he's re-elected, because I don't think he has no, the fact that he won in Wayanad and Kerala, that is meaningless. There was no challenger there. He couldn't win Amethi. That is very significant. I mean, if Modi would have lost Banaras, I would have said the same thing, that he has certainly no right to be the Prime Minister of the country if you can't win. And I would actually say that Modi or any Prime Minister of the country should pretty much be able to win from any seat in the country. I mean, with all the resources and all the publicity available to the top leaders, one seat is not a big deal. And in Rahul Gandhi's case, we're talking about Amethi, which is like a pocket borough. They've won it for like 40 years. And strangely, the BJP supporters of Smriti Irani, etc., they say that people of Amethi have rejected Rahul Gandhi because he's not developed Amethi. That's actually not the right thing. The job of a member of parliament is not to develop a constituency, it's just to represent the voice in the parliament. The development of a constituency is not within the purview again of a member of parliament. They have a small discretionary fund. It's very small, it's like 5 crore rupees or something, which you can build maybe a toilet or a school with. But the job to develop the constituency is the job of the state government, not of the member of parliament. So the fact that people of Rahul Gandhi have voted out, people of Amethi have voted out Rahul Gandhi, is not because Rahul Gandhi did not build roads there. Because in that case, Smriti Irani will also be voted out because she will also not be able to build roads there because she simply can't. Alright, next up is, the whole mainstream media about BJP, Hindutva, fascist party, India is in danger, Hindustan khatre mein, aakhri election hai, all that sort of crap. First and foremost, it's impossible for one person to improve India or to threaten India. These are two sides of one coin. If you can expect one person to improve India, then that one person can also threaten India. I'm saying that it is impossible for one person to improve India, which is why I'm saying that there's very little that Modi can do from a day-to-day life improvement perspective. And conversely, it is also impossible for him to threaten India. He cannot overnight change the constitutional structure. He cannot change, how elections are conducted. He cannot change how the judiciary works independently, with all its flaws, pretty independently. He cannot change that, and that's good because there are checks and balances in place. So this whole rhetoric about Hindutva and right wing and minorities not being safe, etc., it's a big piece of crap. That's all it is. Like I said, there's no real right wing in India. If you go back to the definition of right wing, it's from the French Parliament, where if you they didn't have a speaker, but whoever the king's representative in the Parliament was just kind of appointed the speaker. And the people to the right, who were the landowners and the estate, so the nobility, they were seated on the right of that person, and therefore they were called the right wingers. That's all. And they, of course, had conservative views in the sense that they wanted to protect their own interests. How does that apply to the BJP? The BJP, the guy, Prime Minister, used to sell tea. He has no estate. In fact, the Congress party could be accused of being right wingers because they certainly have their own estates. But I'm not holding that against them. If you think of right and left wing politics, there are usually 5 or 6 parameters on which you gauge whether someone's more right wing or left wing or centrist. So there's religion, economics, social stratification, anti-communism, nationalism. So religion, does the BJP have right-wing religious ideologies? No, they don't. What are right-wing religious ideologies? Go to the US, they want to ban abortion because God gets angry at abortion. Not because abortion is bad or good, but because it's a Catholic doctrine. They don't want to teach evolution or want to limit the teaching of evolution because it contradicts the teachings in the Bible, and things like that. Does the BJP seek to change what is evolution because some of our scriptures say that Brahma created earth and the universe in a certain way? No, absolutely not. In fact, RSS Sarsang Chalak Mohan Bhagwat a few years ago specifically said that remove everything that is unscientific from the Hindu Dharma. Can you imagine the Pope or someone saying something like this? I mean, their whole religion is based on unscientific stuff. Ours is different. Ours is also unscientific, but there is room for questioning and there is room for not accepting things that are unscientific, which is clearly evidenced by the fact that Mohan Bhagwat said that, and he's supposed to be an RSS right-wing leader. I have a link to that report in my in the comments of this video, a description of this video. So no, not on religion, on economics. Are they right-wing, left-wing? No, they're all populist. It's all about right-wing is about smaller governments. It's about limiting the role of government. It's about more free trade. It's about less subsidies, etc. Is there a big difference between the Congress and the BJP on that? No. Both of them give farm loan waivers, free electricity, and all sorts of SOPs. The government sizes are the same. I think the Modi cabinet is probably the largest cabinet that India has ever seen, because you have to keep everyone happy. Every ally with 3 seats needs a cabinet berth. So you create a ministry. In fact, there's this gentleman, Professor Vaidyanathan, who speaks quite often. He's an IIM professor, and he makes this point that I resonate with so much, that India runs. I'm actually putting this in my own words, but India runs in spite of its government, not because of its government. So if you shut 15 ministries from the central government of India, no one would notice. I'd actually bet that if you shut the Parliament of India, no one would notice for a year or so, because it doesn't matter to the people on the street what they're squabbling about, because after all the Parliament can do is enact laws, and laws are barely implemented in India anyway. So on economics, no, there's no real big difference. Social stratification, right-wingers were about that all people are not equal. Modi's and BJP's statement is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and now Sabka Vishwas. So clearly, at least on the face of it, they are not supporting any sort of social stratification. And please understand that the right-wing parties proudly support or supported social stratification. They clearly said that God has not created all people equally, and therefore people have their own roles in society. And you can kind of tie that to the bastardization of the caste system in India. But does the Prime Minister ask for that today? No. And that's what you need to judge him on, not on what's happened in the past and what others have done. And there's no evidence to that effect. Anti-communism, that's probably one area in which they are right-wing, but then the Congress is right-wing too, because both of them are against the communist ideology in India. The Congress is probably closer to the communist ideology. The BJP is certainly against it. So on this one ground, I see that they're right-wing, and that's good for the country, because I don't think there's any space for the sort of communism that exists in India to exist, because they think that China is their role model, but they have no idea about how China is run. And nationalism, again, people always call BJP the more nationalistic party. I'm not quite sure if that's the case. I mean, how do you gauge nationalism? Screaming on social media is not about nationalism. Gaurav Sindhya was a prominent Congress leader. Sachin Pilot did not fight the Lok Sabha elections for good reason. He's the Deputy Chief Minister of Rajasthan, which means he did not participate in Lok Sabha elections, but who knows what would have happened if he would have participated. So I'm actually quite disappointed in the fact that all of these people have failed to perform in the recent elections, because now the demand of Rahul Gandhi to resign from the presidentship of the Congress party is meaningless. Who would take over? Sonia Gandhi is getting too old for this, and that would also signal desperation. The newer generation leaders, as they were touted for all these years, Sindhya, Deora and Pilot, 2 of them have performed poorly, and therefore there's no one really left to take on that baton and provide that sort of inspirational leadership in the party that it so desperately needs. So I missed out on that point earlier, so I just wanted to make it. The other point that I wanted to also make, which I missed out on when I was talking about the charge that BJP is a fascist, right-wing, Hindutva, blah 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 party. and the analysis of the media around this election, even if you, for example, if you look at the NDTV coverage of the election after the results have been declared, most of them maintain that the election went BJP's way because it was a highly polarized election. So let's think a little bit about what they mean. Polarization, so you have the poles, and when things start to move to one pole or the other, you could call that some sort of polarization. So what they are saying is that the electorate was polarized between the right and the left. Now, I don't even want to get into whether that actually happened, but just point out that is polarization necessarily a bad thing? We have to understand that for all these years, when the Congress party actually ruled India and won through the electoral mechanism, they also took a very specific policy of polarization, but in their case, they were making sure that the Hindu bloc, if I can call it that, was scattered, and the Muslim bloc was polarized, which means they were all attracted to some sort of a nuclei, being the Congress party, or pole, to use that analogy. So the Congress party specifically made sure that Muslims remain one voting bloc. Even though they have very little in common, they are as heterogeneous as any other community of India. What does the Muslim of Kashmir have to do with the Muslim of Andhra Pradesh? Very little. In fact, in many cases, they detest each other, just like the Hindus. But the Congress, that did not prevent the Congress from using a strategy to polarize them. Now, BJP, what they have done is make sure that the Muslim bloc, which they can't really control much, is as it is. But the Hindu bloc, instead of being scattered, they have polarized them and turned that into some sort of a voting bloc. So really what the BJP has done is what the Congress had mastered for all these years. It's just that now it's come back to bite them, and they're calling it a polarized election. By itself, it doesn't really mean anything if a certain group of people start to agree with a particular viewpoint. Just that those people lose the share of faith doesn't necessarily mean it's some sort of a bad thing. And remember, Indian democracy is very transient, like I mentioned previously, with leaders jumping parties, so do voters. A lot of people, a lot of the Hindu voters in particular, have obviously over the years been Congress voters, but today they are BJP voters. The same perhaps cannot be said about the Muslims, because they still harbor, in my opinion, unnecessary inhibitions about the BJP. So you can't say that about them yet, but certainly in terms of the Hindu voters, BJP has managed to make them rise above their caste politics, which all the other parties have forced them to do in the interest of their own gains, and BJP has been able to elevate them to a level where they have something shared and then vote for the BJP. Alright, with that out of the way, I just wanted to close by touching on what are my expectations from Modi Government 2.0. Now, in terms of performance, as I mentioned, there is very little like the Prime Minister can do from a day-to-day, from improving someone's day-to-day life is concerned. But there are a few things that I really expect this government to do, because they are our really hope. They are our only hope, I mean, especially when it comes to these particular provisions that I'll talk about. And many of these were also promises they've made in the past, and they have failed to meet them. And therefore, we should hold them accountable and to task. The first one I want to focus on is the simplification of laws. Like I mentioned, the primary job of the parliament is to enact legislation. So this is firmly within their purview. And therefore, I would really like the government to take the lead in simplification of laws, especially around how businesses are run and accounted for, income tax laws. I reckon we should only have 1 or 2 slabs of income tax, given that it's such a minuscule percentage of our total revenue anyway, and yet we have, I don't know, 1 million people employed by the income tax department. I'm 100% sure that the cost actually outweighs the benefit that comes, and not to take into account the mental harassment that it causes people, because that's not accounted for from a financial perspective. And then other laws like the GST, which the government was able to bring in its previous tenure, which is a welcome move, but obviously it's got 5 or 6 slabs. There is need to further consolidate it. I understand why it's hard to have a 1 slab GST. That's a pipe dream, like Australia or Singapore or these countries. A good comparison from a GST perspective would be the US, and just for people who don't know, US doesn't have a uniform GST because they have similar challenges. They have lots of states and they're a federation, and the states have certain powers, and to have them agree to something is very hard. So we have made our states agree, which is a good first step, and now we need to consolidate the GST slabs just to make it easier for people to report and therefore incentivize honesty. The other thing that I want to talk about from a priority perspective is this topic that never comes up in any discourse, and that's around population stabilization. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that a lot of problems that India faces is due to an overpopulated nation. In fact, if you look at UN's, the UN environmental body, I'm forgetting the name, if you look at their definition of what's the ideal land to man ratio, and this is in India's case after taking into account the fact that India as a country is fertile, it's got year-long sunshine, and therefore can support a larger mass of people. The ideal population for India in relation to its land mass is around 200 million people. 200 million. So that's 20 crore people. We are 130 crore people. In fact, it's funny that Modi in 2013, when he started his electoral pitch, started by saying that mere desh ke 120 crore nagrik. Then by the time he won, it became 125 crore. And I don't know if you've been paying attention in this last campaign for 2019, it's 130 crore. That's 10 crore people. That's 4 times the population of Australia that has been added just while Modi has been in power. And this can surely not be a good thing. I know there is this concept of a demographic dividend. We are a fairly young country, but everything has its limits. And a larger population just imposes severe handicaps on the infrastructure, on our resources, on the environment, etc. And that brings me nicely to the next point, which is, which should also be a priority for the government, which is environmental conservation, because India's forests have disappeared, our water resources have depleted, urbanization has been so unplanned, especially in cities like Pune, Bangalore. I'm testament to these. The ridiculous use of bore wells and reverse osmosis to purify water without understanding what happens, where does it come from, what is the energy, what's the carbon footprint that's required to consume that bottle of purified water for your comfort. No one's thinking about these things. In central Maharashtra, in Marathwada, for example, you need to now dig 200 feet into the ground to find water. Such is the state of the water table. Same problem in Punjab with the use of tube wells and bore wells, and just indiscriminate use, most of which are actually illegal. The water table is so low, and the water is also quite acidic now. So these are very important issues, and a good step in this direction would be to appoint someone of some standing to this ministry. These are not considered sexy portfolios. People want the defense or the home or the state the foreign portfolios. Who cares about the water resources portfolio? I think that the best cabinet ministers of India should go to water resources and the associated ministries. I think there are a couple of other things that ministry takes care of. Infrastructure, so that's Mr. Gadkari. I think he should continue. And the third one is the education ministry. I think these are the 3 most important ministries from an India's future perspective, and therefore the Prime Minister would be well advised to get the best talent into the cabinet berths for these ministries. Moving on, from an environmental perspective and a population perspective, it also is linked to another problem that we have: judicial and police reforms. We have way too many cases, too few courts and judges, and the quality is even poorer. Every party in the last 50 years in its manifesto has promised to bring police and judicial reforms, and BJP is no exception. They had it in the 2014 manifesto, they have it in their current manifesto, but no action's been taken. We need more courts, we need more judges, we need more investment in that direction. We also need to think about alternative ways of implementation and mediation, for example, arbitration courts and stuff like that, which, for example, in Australia there are tribunals which don't have a legal standing of that sort. That means they can't actually fine you or send you to jail. But if both parties agree, you can go to a tribunal, and that tribunal can give you a non-binding judgment, and that saves the time of actually having to go to a court, which in these countries is also a very expensive process. because you need to pay very hefty lawyer and court fees to engage the court. So you actually discourage people from going to the court, and you encourage them to solve problems within themselves, like grown-up adults should. So, and police is another example. Our police force is in a state of decay. The gulf, I always make this point, the gulf between the Indian military and the Indian police force is far too wide. The quality of the Indian military is so high and the quality of our police force is so low. It shouldn't be the case. You look at the accommodation that the army officers get and you look at the accommodation that the police officers get, there is no comparison. The perks are totally different. The salaries are much higher for the army. The respect that they enjoy in the country is so much higher. I mean, every person thinks of a police constable as someone who's a corrupt person, and the fact that they are so poorly paid and not properly trained doesn't help their cause either. So judicial and police reforms need to go hand in hand for the rule of law to really take effect in our country, which is not the case today. And lastly, we also need to think about education reforms. We need to decolonize our texts. We need to talk about what really has happened in India, the good things, the bad things. This is not about saffronization of education, as is often accused. The left wingers in Indian media often talk about the saffronization of education. That's not what I'm talking about. Speaking the truth is not saffronization, and if it is saffronization, then so be it. There's nothing wrong in the color saffron, but it's better than than concealing the truth. So the truth about Islamic invasions into India, the truth about partition, the truth about the violence that ensued, the truth about the role of key people in the partition of India and the decisions taken thereof. These are very important, because if we don't understand our history and appreciate it, history tends to repeat itself. And then the other part from an educational reform perspective is that there has to be a scientific temperament that we encourage. So from a textbook perspective, etc., there has to be a focus on on science, on technology, and on evidence-based study. And there can of course be other branches of study for more philosophical subjects, etc. But you have to distinguish between formal science, math-oriented education and the rest. And India actually is very good at that sort of education, more formal scientific mathematical education, because our minds are well suited to that. We have that temperament, if I can call it that. And you might have some ministers say that the first plastic surgery happened in India or something like that, and we had flying missiles before anyone else, etc. They can say what they want so long as it doesn't make it to the textbooks. That's what I'm concerned about. It's fine to say that, hey, look, we are very imaginative. We gave Ganesh an elephant's head when his head got severed. But to imply that that's some sort of a plastic surgery in the context of today's medicine, that's obviously foolish. And I've already mentioned that Mohan Bhagwat has gone on record to say that there should be no space for these sort of unscientific things in our culture, really. So that's also another area in which I think the government would do well to focus on. And then now, lastly, moving on to some of the more, in quotes, Hindutva agendas. They're not really Hindutva agendas. The first one is, of course, Uniform Civil Code. I spoke about this earlier. I think this should be number one on the list, and it's really a very secular agenda, and all parties should get behind it. It's part of the Constitution. The Constitution was not drafted by the BJP. It's part of every other secular state. It's not about the Muslims. Muslims live in Australia, they have no problem with Uniform Civil Code. Muslims live in the USA, they have no problems with Uniform Civil Code. And they would have no problems with Uniform Civil Code in India if it was done. But if you keep asking them, then that's a little bit of a problem, because you cannot make 200 million people agree to everything you say, especially when they're of the opinion that you are up to something malicious. Abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, very important. Again, political problem, nothing to do necessarily with Hindutva, but I am putting it in this bucket list because there is a little bit of Hindutva, Hindu Renaissance, and Islamic/Pakistan viewpoint to Kashmir, because what has happened there's been an ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits, there's been a demographic change, and there has been there has been a clear attempt to link Kashmir and Kashmiri Muslims to the concept of a worldwide ummah, which is very detrimental to Indian interests and to Indian Muslim interests in all honesty. And Article 370 and 35A actually are instruments that support that. They are the crutches on which these forces actually stand. And not only should we get rid of them, which is very much possible in my opinion, we should also trifurcate the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We should break it into Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh should include the northern areas of Gilgit-Baltistan, which are occupied by Pakistan at this moment. And we should also have some special representation from Gilgit-Baltistan. I mentioned this in some articles I've written before as well. There is a legal question, there is a historical question, and then there is a faith or a religious question, if you must use that word. The courts are only equipped to deal with the legal question, and the legal question is who owns that land. Anyone can own it. The Hindus or the Ram Janmabhoomi or the Modi government don't care, because the government can always acquire the land and nationalize it, like they do for highways. And all that the owner of the land, which is yet to be decided, can do is to approach the government, and if they're not happy, the courts for a settlement and a suitable compensation. The courts cannot decide matters of faith, and certainly they shouldn't, because if they start doing that, they are not trying to answer the question whether Ram was born there or not, and they can't, because they are asking for papers. वो कह रहे हैं कि कागज दो, हम कह रहे हैं यहाँ राम पैदा हुए. So there is no correlation between these things. So we have to stick to what the court does, but the court cannot solve the dispute, is what I'm trying to say. The dispute needs governmental intervention. That intervention has been promised by Narasimha Rao to the Supreme Court. There's nothing wrong with it. It is established by the Archaeological Survey of India that there was an existing Vaishnavite temple, and Ram is obviously an avatar of Vishnu, under the Babri Masjid. And you don't need to be an archaeological expert to understand the Islamic conquest of India and how many temples were broken and replaced by masjids. This is all gloriously documented in their own journals, and I have a few of them here actually with me. So the government needs to take a stand and suitably solve that problem. And from a masjid's perspective, anyway that masjid was not in use, you can make another one. The people, of course, who are behind the demolition, which is an extrajudicial activity, they should certainly be tried and jailed. But that doesn't mean you keep holding hostage the people who desire to visit the Ram Janmabhoomi, build a temple there and pray. And again, I am certainly not going to be one of those people who go there and pray, but the state and the Indian state under this government has to recognize the injustices of the past and correct them. And if the Muslims have a problem with that, it's usually one of two things. One is that they are associated with the people who invaded India. So you might be of the opinion that you are Babur's descendants, in which case I don't really have any respect for you, especially if you continue glorifying him. And the second one is just that they're misled and bullied into taking a stand that's actually not something that they would want to do if they would understand the problem fully. Alright then, so moving on from the Ram Janmabhoomi dispute, the next wish list item I have for the government is to free Hindu temples and institutions of governmental control. Not sure many of you know, but the law in India treats the Hindu-run institutions, temples, trusts, etc. differently to how it treats those run by minority communities. And not only is this a breach of secular principles, because either you would firstly the state has no role to play in these sort of affairs, but also it would make no sense to have some sort of oversight of one community's affairs and not of the other community. So for example, the Tirupati temple in Andhra Pradesh, the government has oversight or can request for how the funds are managed and distribute them in any way they deem fit, etc. But they can't do the same for Jama Masjid in Delhi, as if the people in Tirupati are more susceptible to corruption than the people in Jama Masjid. So it doesn't make any sense. This is actually a relic of our British colonial past, which is when these provisions were in place, because obviously they were exploitative in nature. But the government has yet not taken this up, and this is very much something they can do. It's a legislation that needs to be revoked, so it doesn't require any special state or local administration to be involved, and I expect this government to pick it up and fix it. Although it's not in the manifesto, so I'm not quite sure whether they will, but I hope they do. The next one I have in mind is a slightly more controversial one around the conversion of Hindus into other faiths, particularly Abrahamic faiths. When Hindus talk about conversion, they don't mean about conversion to Buddhism or Sikhism, because the ideas that those philosophies brings are not inimical to the ideas that Hindu thought professes. So they're kind of part of that same family in some ways. Now, is there anything wrong in someone converting to Christianity or Islam? No, I don't think so. If you're sitting in your living room like I am today and decide that Jesus paid you a visit and therefore you should be a Christian, sure, why not? But the problem is that's not how conversion happens in India. The way it happens is that it's often funded by foreign sources, and there's a lot of work that's been done on this by Rajiv Malhotra in his book Breaking India. And these forces and their ideologies and their agendas are often in relation to the Indian state. They are often opposed to the idea of India and Indian state, the Indian institutions. For example, in Tamil Nadu, the nexus between the church, the left-wing protest groups, and recently there was a Sterilite plant there that they wanted to build, but there were protests that shut it down. The same thing happened with the Kudanakulam nuclear power plant that they wanted to build there, which was shut down by activists. And those activists, then it was later found, were actually propped up and backed by the local churches. And guess where the money for the local churches came from? From somewhere in Missouri or Kansas in the Bible Belt in the U.S. So we need to be very aware of this idea that Abrahamic faiths are very organized. Abrahamic faiths are very dangerous to our stability and security. And when we have evidence of what's happened when demographic change has gone too far, Kashmir is what it is today because it is a Muslim majority area within the state of J&K, and for no other reason. Ladakh is Buddhist. They have no interest in fighting India or joining Pakistan. Jammu is primarily Hindu. They have no interest in fighting India or joining Pakistan. For some reason, Muslims of Kashmir view history differently, and that is because of the religious conversion there, and the joining of the of their aspirations with that of their ummah worldwide. The same is, by the way, the case in Nagaland, where the secessionist movement there is actually religiously inspired, and the organization behind it, I'm forgetting the name, Nagaland Socialist Something Council. The name sounds very fancy, but it's actually to create a theological state for Christ, and that's their main reason for secession from India. And Nagaland was, of course, converted into Christianity only in the last 70 years. I mean, what does you just look at the map of the world and locate Nagaland on it. It's got nothing to do with Christianity. I mean, it's like it's got Tibet on one side, India on one side, Bangladesh, China, and none of these countries have anything to do with Christianity. But yet that area is 98% Christian. How did that happen? That happened through mass conversion, and now that is fueling secessionist movements. So we need to be very aware of this. The government needs to be very aware of it. It's very much the prerogative of the government, and you can't ask people what they think is right in these cases. You have to make your own judgments as people in charge of governance. In China, for heaven's sake, you can't even build a church. When have you heard about protests by Christians in Tamil Nadu that Chinese are being they're being denied the right to join Christ's gospel or whatever? When do you hear the United States criticize China for its suppression of Christianity? They don't, because they can't, and even if they did, China doesn't care because they know what's right for them, and therefore we also need to, of course in our own way, we don't need to be stupid if they're stupid. We need to also figure out what's right for us, and therefore I think we need to have anti-conversion laws that prevent the mass conversion of people on the false premise that it will help improve those people's lives, because it won't. The tribal in Chhattisgarh who is converted to Christianity will remain a tribal, illiterate, impoverished, and has nothing to do, and his life will not, sorry, I was just saying that, he has nothing to do with what's going on in the USA or in Europe, but he's just a victim or really a pawn in a larger game which seeks to impose its monopoly on the world. But his lifestyle is not going to change in any way, unless he of course becomes a part of the church and starts getting money and also converting other people. So there's this economic coercion and there's a social coercion aspect to it which we have to recognize. And then lastly, I want to talk about the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which was the government attempted to pass it in the last year. It passed the Lok Sabha but stalled in the Rajya Sabha. And this bill is about giving our brethren from what was India, which is now Pakistan and Bangladesh, their due in terms of giving them citizenship of India. Because they had no choice in deciding when Pakistan is made, where Pakistan is made. They didn't support it. They are victims of a larger game, and a lot of them are paid with their lives. And there are very few who remain. It's a small number. They live in indescribable conditions. Most of them feel it is easier and they have a better chance of surviving with some sort of dignity if they cross over to India, which is what they do. And most of them are still living in refugee camps along the Sindh border in Rajasthan and also in parts of Bengal and Assam. And it's a moral duty as a nation to give them a pathway to citizenship of India, because they were always Indian. They never chose the fate of Pakistan upon themselves, and they should have a right to return home. And that's what the Citizenship Amendment Bill does. And the hue and cry surrounding it is just because of lack of information or deliberate propaganda to prop up again the Muslim card, etc. Because the bill only applies to Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, etc., and not to Muslims. But there is a historical and a moral reason for that, which is historical, moral, and legal, which is that we ought to treat economic migration separate to minorities who are fleeing persecution. And if Bangladeshis want to come to India to work, they can. They need to apply for a work visa, and that's fine. But they can't come to India and say that, hey, we are being persecuted by our fellow Muslims. Because if that was the case, then too bad, we shouldn't have made that country in the first place, because a lot of people are paid with their lives for fulfilling that dream. So you can't have it both ways. I think that summarizes what I wanted to say to you, and this turned out to be longer than I first thought, but so be it. I hope you enjoyed listening and watching me, and if you did, then let me know, share your comments and thoughts. If there are any other areas on which you'd want me to talk, share my experiences or information that I have from whatever readings I've done, let me know, and I'll certainly consider making another video to cover some of those. But for now, thank you and goodbye.